Good evening. My name is Michael Ulrich, Director of NYU Washington, D.C. I am happy to welcome you to the Abramson Family Auditorium for the second dialogue in this year's Weissberg Forum for Discourse in the Public Square. Thanks to Tom McIntyre and Sruti Ramadugu for organizing our program this week. With the generosity of the Weissberg family, NYU Washington, D.C. has organized two forums to examine the current immigration reform measures and how these policy choices have and will affect the immigrant community. Our first forum, held this past Tuesday, addressed the evolving debate over comprehensive immigration reform from a policy perspective. Tonight we will examine how immigration policies of the United States affect young, documented and undocumented immigrants and their access to education, healthcare, employment, as well as the consequences of immigration policies for the criminalization and incarceration of this vulnerable population. I am happy to welcome back Angela Maria Kelley, our Weissberg Scholar in Residence and Vice President for Immigration Policy at the Center for American Progress. In the years since Angie's arrival at CAP, the organization has published numerous reports and analyses on a range of immigration issues, including the economic impact of state anti-immigrant laws, the economic value of immigration reform, the cost of mass deportation, and the integration trends of America's newcomers. Before joining CAP in 2009, Angie served as director of the Immigration Policy Center and deputy director at the National Immigration Forum. Angie was also at the forefront of advocacy that secured legislative victories, including the Legal Immigration Family Equity Act, the Haitian Refugee Immigration Fairness Act, and the Nicaraguan Adjustment and Central American Relief Act. Angie will introduce our panelists and lead our discussion this evening. Thank you, Angie, and welcome.
All right, got the mic on, yay. And we are missing a panelist, but we're going to get started. Thank you so much, Michael. It was wonderful to be here on Tuesday. It's great to be back. Thanks to NYU, and thank you very much to Nina Weissberg, who I had the pleasure of meeting on Tuesday, who came up with this spectacular idea and has made it possible for us all to be here. So as Michael mentioned, this is the second of two panel discussions. We had one on Tuesday that was all about our policies on immigration and how broken our current system is. We looked at visa limits and the problem with those numerical limitations, the 11 million, and what kind of legalization program might work. We talked about enforcement, the border, employment verification systems, and we talked a lot about the politics, and Governor O'Malley of Maryland was here and has really been a leader in state-level policies that are pro-immigrant. But tonight's discussion is going to be really different because today's panelists come at this topic from very different perspectives, but I really think that they typify just how strong this movement's become and how leaning into this issue as advocates, as researchers, as organizers, and as women who care is why we're stronger now than we've ever been before. So what we're going to talk about tonight is more about the fallout of the current immigration system, the consequences when you have people in this country without status, when you have families that are of mixed status. Welcome, Andrea. It's great to have you here. What I want to very much focus on are your stories and your experiences. You're each going to, and you can speak from the podium or you can just speak from here in the order that we're seated and just talk for a few minutes about whatever you want to, just to help set the stage for your perspective. And then I'm going to lead us through a conversation, Oprah style, and I really want us to give the feel that we're just sitting around a table talking to each other, right? Just 5 women, really sharing about why we do this work and what we've experienced in doing it. And that these guys are all in the audience just lucky enough, and those who are watching on their computers at home in their pajamas, lucky enough to get to listen in on us. So that's the feel that I'm trying to create. So let me do just a quick round of introductions, but there isn't anything that I could say that begin to give credit to these spectacular women for the work they've done. You're just going to get to feel it and experience it in the conversation. But all the way to my right is Erica Andiola. And I really struggled with how to begin to describe you, girl. She is the founder of the Arizona Dream Coalition. But she's, aside being a dreamer, she's really a doer. And Erica has led people and motivated them and mobilized them to fight for what they need for a better future. And she also did that for herself in fighting to protect her family. That was targeted for enforcement action, and her mother was nearly deported from this country. And she used the power of social media and had all of us, I really was in my pajamas when your email came in, and on a dime, people mobilized around her. But it can't be the case that just because Erica is the extraordinary leader that she is, that only she would have the benefit of that, and she knows that better than anyone and has been at the forefront of extraordinary work on behalf of Dreamers and all the 11 million. To my right is Joanna Drebby, who I've had the honor of meeting. We've done some terrific work together, and this is a gal who is a deep, serious academic researcher, but who also brings extraordinary heart into her research. She's an assistant professor in sociology at the University of Albany, at the State University of New York. And she's written and researched on Mexican transnational families. She has gotten into the most intimate of settings with families that have experienced our broken immigration system and understanding what the consequence is for the parents, for the children, for communities, and I think can probably see down the road and around the curve better than just about anybody what the consequences are of our broken immigration system. So it's great to have you here, Joanna. And then to my left is Tolu, because we went a little bit out of order, but I got you here, Tolu. So Tolu came to this country when she was 14 years old, which is the age of just about the age of my youngest daughter. So I know how hard that would be. She graduated top in her high school. She graduated in the top 5% in an extraordinary university in chemical engineering, no less. And all these years later, because she's a little bit older than 14, she has not been able to be a chemical engineer, which breaks my heart. But what she has turned out to be is an extraordinary advocate, and she is the senior policy analyst at the Center for Community Change. It took her a long time to be able to finally get paid for the work she deserves to be paid for. And so she is an advocate of enormous persistence and of courage, and who I consider a friend, and I'm really honored to have you here. Andrea, I don't know, and I don't know if you pronounce your name Andrea or Andrea?
Andrea.
Cool. So, because I like that better. So Andrea Cristina Mercado is lovely, and she's the campaign director at the National Domestic Workers Alliance. She's been a leader in multiple organizing campaigns of immigrant women, including the super powerful We Belong Together and the Women for Common Sense Immigration Reform. But what I really like about this lady is that in reading your bio, is that she has gone like right to the heart of communities, and she has mobilized women who are speaking for themselves, they're speaking for their families, they're speaking for their communities, rather than having other people like us in Washington speak for them. So I'm really honored to have you here as well. So I'm going to let you ladies now do some talking, and then we'll have a conversation. And Erica, can I turn to you to lead off?
Yeah, of course. Wow, this is really cool technology. It's like amazed. Yeah, well, let me just tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about my background. As Angie was saying, I've been organizing for the immigrant rights movement for about, I don't even know, 4 or 5 years. It seems like forever, so if you hear me say like back in the day, I don't mean like 20 years ago, I just mean like maybe 2 years ago. It felt like a really long period of time. So the reason why I started organizing wasn't just because I woke up on the right side of the bed and decided, oh, this is the thing to do nowadays, to go protest, right, in senator's office. It was because my mother decided to also bring me to the U.S. when I was 11 years old. And she decided to bring me because as a really strong, amazing woman who wanted something better for her children, decided to run away from my dad, who was very abusive at the time. So she brought us to the U.S., running away from that violence, and just given the fact that he was really stalking us, we needed to move away at a place where he couldn't get to us. And so, she decided to take the really, really tough choice of bringing us through the desert. We walked for a really long time. I was 11, I remember a little bit. When my brother was 2 years old, he doesn't remember anything. But we got here, and it's been a challenge, but it's also been a blessing. She is one of the people that has inspired me to do anything that I've done. But when I woke up really of everything that was happening was in 2007 when Arizona passed something called Proposition 300. It was basically a law that repealed in-state tuition for undocumented students, and also it asked us to pay three times more than we were already paying, and they took all of our scholarships away if they were given to us by the university. At this time, I was a little bit of a nerd in high school, so I was able to get about 3 full rides to ASU, and everything was paid for, everything was great. I worked really hard for it. But of course, this law came into effect, and I had to lose all my scholarships, and I had to pay about $20,000 to go to school. And so, as you can imagine, I was pretty angry, and I realized there was tons of dreamers at ASU. I thought I was the only undocumented student, and my best friend who was also there. And so, we were able to find a scholarship that wanted to help us continue our education, and this same scholarship put a lot of undocumented students together in the same room at ASU. And so it was really amazing. I looked around the room and I was like, wow, that guy is in like my salsa class, and I thought he was Chicano, like he doesn't have papers, and it was really amazing. And I think that's when we all looked at each other. We all decided that we realized that we had very similar stories, that all of us couldn't just drive. We couldn't drive because we couldn't get a license. We couldn't get a job because we didn't have a social security. Many things that our friends were already doing, we couldn't do it, even though we were already college students. So, we really, really felt the need to start organizing at ASU, and so we started, organizing for the DREAM Act. I don't know if some of you know what that is, but we were like, well, that's a good way for us to get papers, right? We get something passed through Congress. And that's sort of how we initiated our advocacy. We started like tabling at ASU, giving flyers. But it was something very different from now, is that we were still very afraid, and we even like changed our names. So my name wasn't Eric at the time, it was like Maria or whatever I could find. And I would tell people, on campus, like, I'm undocumented, but I wouldn't give my real name. Even on the news, we wouldn't give our real names until we started sort of meeting other youth from across the country, and we started realizing that the problem with immigration was that we were not telling the story. The story was being told by the news, and the story was being told by people who were not in our shoes, right? And so we said, you know what, we need to change that. We need to start telling people who we are, and we're not going to get that done by telling people that our name is Maria or Jose when it's really not. And so we started coming out of the shadows, and we started building a really amazing movement that eventually got to 2010, and Tolu has been there forever too. So she can tell you how hard it's been to sort of come out of the shadows and have dreamers do the same as us. And so it's been amazing, and I thought I was untouchable at some point. I said, wow, we come out of the shadows, nobody can do anything to us because people know who we are now, and immigration is not as open to come to us, right, and target us. Except this year, in January, that kind of mentality changed a little bit in one moment when immigration came to my house in January. They knocked on my door, and they were looking for my mother. And so my first reaction was like, shit, they're coming for me because of what I'm doing, right? And now they're targeting my mom, which I don't know if it's the case, but that was sort of my first reaction. But thank God I remember that I have an amazing movement behind me that we created in the whole country. And I started, going from like the scared daughter that was seeing her mom being handcuffed, and her brother, because they also took my brother who was there, being handcuffed and taken into these cars, to being the activist and the organizer that knew how to stop deportations. And in a matter of 12 hours that day, we were able to release my brother through a huge campaign that we were able to create. And we were also able to stop the bus that had my mother going to Mexico. Somebody from ICE here in DC made the call, and the driver literally turned the bus, and they dropped my mom off in Phoenix, where I live. And so through that, I realized, you know what, yes, maybe they targeted me, maybe not, but what I can tell you is that the power of organizing that we have created has showed us that we can make that kind of action happen. You know, return the bus, make immigration realize who we are as human beings. And I think it has gotten us closer to getting something, you know, in Congress, maybe getting the president to stop deportations. We're not there yet, but I think we can get there pretty soon. So that's me in a nutshell. Sorry, I talked a lot.
That's a good story. Thank you. Janet, you want to give some opening
Sure.
thoughts?
Yeah. Well, unlike Erica and Tolu, I'm here to talk actually from the perspective of younger children who aren't so courageous and haven't gotten to that spot where they're out and really being active. Over the past 4 years, I've done a research project where I was interviewing children ages 5 to 15 living in 2 different Mexican immigrant communities, one in New Jersey and one in Ohio. In total, I interviewed 110 children and 91 parents, and I also visited kids in their homes, and I went to their schools. So I was doing research with these children, and I was trying to understand really how this immigration policy situation that we have right now is affecting children's lives. And actually, I started out not even thinking about immigration policy. My research goal was to look at how children's lives are different in different types of immigrant communities, because in Ohio and New Jersey, the Mexican communities are very different. But immigration is the story that children kept coming back to again and again and again. So I had included in my sample children who were undocumented, but also children who are US-born citizens, and some children who are legal migrants. And I also included parents who were unauthorized and parents who are legal migrants, and some parents who are US-born citizens but were married to somebody who was a Mexican immigrant. So I sort of had a lot of different legal statuses going on, and in trying to conceptualize and think about how does immigration policy affect families, I was really surprised that it was affecting every single family I spoke with, even those with legal status, even those who are US citizens. And I really think this is because of 2 features of immigration policy today. The first, as Erica mentioned, are the deportation policies. 400,000 people being deported every year over the past 4 to 5 years. And that's a very significant change from the beginning of the 21st century. And the second part of policy that's really affecting the families that I interviewed is the fact that nobody can legalize. There really aren't any pathways for legalization. Every family I interviewed would have legalized if they could. That was not a possibility. And in fact, I think demographers estimate that approximately 16.6 million people in the US live in a family that is mixed status. Then one person in that family doesn't have legal status, at least one person. So I'm trying to think about how do these immigration policies really affect children. As a sociologist, I started to think about the framework actually from public health. So public health people, researchers, use this imagery of the injury pyramid. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but in an injury pyramid, there's a little pyramid, and they view the incidences at the top of the pyramid as the most devastating ones, the ones with the harshest consequences. So take for an example drownings. A fatality that occurs from a drowning would be at the top of the pyramid. But public health researchers actually describe it as a pyramid because there are many other incidences that could have become a fatality that didn't make it that far. And that actually affects many, many more people. So they try to conceptualize it because at the top there actually aren't that many fatal drownings, but if you think about it as a pyramid and go down, there are many more people that end up, say, in the hospital because of some incident, or end up going to their doctor or to the ER. So I started thinking about this pyramid formation because I think it best describes how families I met were affected by immigration policies. Some of the families I met had these terrible experiences with somebody being deported. But actually, only 16 of the 81 families I interviewed had a direct experience with deportation. So there were a few cases I had with children who never have spoken to their father again after he's been deported. It's terrible, and we hear about this in the news. These are really awful cases, but I would characterize them as being at the top of the pyramid because underneath it there are so many more other consequences happening. Children, to me, described how fearful they are of their parents being deported, even if they've never known somebody who's been deported. You know, I asked them, they said they're afraid, they tell me in interviews, little kids, 6 and 7, that they're afraid that somebody's going to take their mom away. And I said, well, do you know someone who's had their mom taken away? And they say, no, but they're afraid of it. So that's one of those lower levels in the pyramid. Another lower level in the pyramid is that children are conflating ICE and the police. So they're talking about the police and the ICE together. One 11-year-old girl I interviewed, for example, said the police ICE, just like that, police ICE, repeatedly in her interview. She said, I'm afraid the police ICE will take my mom away. She said, and immigrants are people who the police ICE come to look for. Another lower level on that pyramid is children are equating immigration with illegality. We are a nation of immigrants, but the children I interviewed, when I said, do you know what an immigrant is? And they say, yeah. I said, well, what's an immigrant? It's somebody who comes here who's not allowed to be here. And then finally, probably because of this conflation, at the bottom, lower level, I would describe the stigma that children are starting to associate with immigration. So all of the children I interviewed had an immigrant in their family. And I would ask them, do you want your friends at school to know this? And everybody said no. And they said that it was a secret, that it was something that you wouldn't tell because you wouldn't want anybody to spread gossip or rumors. So as I think about immigration policy and the impact it has on families, I want to encourage people to think about the top of that pyramid, those really severe cases, but also those more underlying subtle consequences for children as they grow up here.
All right, thank you. I definitely want to tease that out more when we start our conversation. Tolu?
Thank you. So I think I'm actually going to stand. So I think if my feet start to hurt, I'll stop talking. This might be a good way to make sure I ramble on. Hi, everyone. So Andrew shared a little bit about my story. I came here when I was 14 and did well in high school and quickly learned that doing well in high school was not enough to get the things that you wanted, the life that you wanted, even though you're told every day that working hard, being a good student, and doing all your homework and volunteering was the way to go. But in my case, it wasn't. Still, I was able to go to college and struggled. Chemical engineering did not come easily to me. I will be the first to tell you that. I actually came to chemical engineering my sophomore year after I took my first chemistry class. I don't know if any of you are in that same situation right now. I knew I wanted to be an engineer since I was 8. But I also thought that I could be something called a psychological engineer. Doesn't make any sense, I know. But in my head, I liked psychiatry and I liked engineering. So we could mash that together and make something of it. I soon found out that that was actually not the case. I was not a fan of biology, so there went that. And I took my first chemistry class, and it kicked my butt. I'd never been challenged the way I was in that first chemistry class, and I loved it. And probably the icing on the cake was when I went to see my chemistry professor and told him, I think I want to try chemical engineering. I enjoy chemistry. And he's like, yeah, you're not so good at the chemistry. And chemical engineers are really, really smart, and it's really difficult. And that was all he needed to say to just still my my mind, and I made up my mind in that moment. It's like, well, I'll show you. I can do this, and I did. It was hard, but I did, and I was certain that graduating from college would open these amazing doors to me. Well, it didn't, and so for years I was lost. I was without a job. I was without zero prospects, and seemingly without a home, since I technically couldn't be in the country that I considered my home. In the middle of that, I lost my dad, and I couldn't go home for his funeral. So there was a lot happening for many years that nearly broke me. But in 2008, the presidential elections rolled around, and I just got fired up. And I wanted to contribute. I wanted to help in some way, and I visited probably at least 10 lawyers, and a few of them had told me about the DREAM Act. I Googled it, I followed it online for years, and I decided that, you know what, I want to be the change that I am seeking as well. And so I reached out to the National Immigration Law Center. I said, hey, I know you work on the DREAM Act. I know nothing. I'm an engineer, but I'm smart and I'm a hard worker. And so I can come in a few days a week, whatever you want, file some papers, answer the phone, whatever you need, I'm here. And I interviewed, and I was hired the same day. And there ended up being an opportunity to make of that situation I was in at the National Immigration Law Center whatever I wanted it to be. There was an opportunity to work on policy, so I jumped at it. There was a vacuum, and they didn't have a communications person yet. And I remember when my boss came in and said, the DREAM Act has been, this was in 2009, in the spring of 2009. And she came into my little workspace and she said, the DREAM Act is being introduced next week, and we need to write a press release. Can you do that? I was like, absolutely, of course. And I went home that weekend and Googled press release. I had no idea what I was doing, but I wrote that press release, and I wrote many others after that. And it just, I took the opportunity to live beyond the limitations that were placed on me. It wasn't easy. Angie will tell you that. It was, we've shed some tears, but we kept going, and we made it through. But I still remember the cold December morning in 2010 when we lost the Dream vote. I don't think I'll ever forget that day. The heartbreak that washed over me was overwhelming and all-consuming in so many ways. And because for so many years, this was it. I lived and breathed like Erica, like this was it. There was no differentiation between, all right, I went to work and now I'm going home and that work is done. This is it. It was DREAM Act in the morning, DREAM Act in the afternoon, DREAM Act at night. You worked around the clock, because this was your closest friends, the people that you now consider family, were in the same situation. Your life depended on it. And I was so familiar. I was sitting at the Senate gallery with so many amazing people, and I'd become so familiar with the senators, not because we had tea together, but because I knew their voting record on the issue. I knew state polling on the issue. I knew their objections, let's call it, to the bill, whether genuine or not. I knew what those things are. And as each vote was cast, I was numb in the case of Senator Sessions, for reasons that I'm sure you're all aware of, relieved in the case of Senator McCaskill, and very betrayed in the case of Senator Pryor. Just an aside on that, I took it personally that Senator Pryor voted against the DREAM Act. We'd worked really hard to get his vote, and I felt that he made a decision to protect his political career that sacrificed, at least temporarily, our futures. But good thing we're on good terms now, since he did the right thing with the Senate vote back in June. We're good. We're square, at least on that little piece of the puzzle. But amidst all of that heartbreak, in that moment, it was completely different from when we lost the the Senate vote in 2007. In 2007, I wept alone in my room. But in 2010, I was surrounded by dreamers, and not just, it's like we say dreamers all the time, but it's easy to look at the label and not look at the people. But they weren't just dreamers to me. These are people that felt my pain and knew my pain better than my own family. And these are the folks that I was surrounded by. I was surrounded by advocates like Angie, who dedicated their careers to making securing a better future for me, which is more than I could ever dream to have. And honestly, a burden shared truly is a burden halved. In that Senate gallery, I shed many tears of pain, but mixed within it, and to my own surprise, were tears of joy. I knew I wasn't alone. I would never be alone. But more importantly, I knew that we were going to win, because we could not win. There are so many amazing people that recognize the importance of the issue and are so committed to the issue that it's inevitable. You know, it's an economic necessity for us, yes. It's a political necessity for a lot of the members in Congress, yes. But more than that, it is just humane. It's human rights. It's, people that recognize and appreciate the United States as their home. And you just can't do away with a generation of these amazing, amazing individuals. So in that moment, things changed for me. And I just knew that this was one sad moment, but there were amazing days yet to come. Senator Durbin, in his introduction at a Senate press conference, said something that I'll never forget. He said, "Her misfortune has been our good fortune." And I have to admit that, although not always evident, my misfortune has also been my good fortune. I've been transformed from an insulated, ambitious, but self-focused individual to someone who recognizes her responsibilities to her community, to the nation, and frankly to the world. I see beyond the shores of the US now. It's just, for some reason, this fight has opened me up to the amazing people that are here, but also are around or everywhere else in the world and interconnected to everything that we do and say and how our policies are negotiated and litigated or whatever it is that we do. All of the heartbreak and the pain, some days I find myself not being willing to admit that they're worth it, but they absolutely are. Because out of the ashes of my own despair has blossomed a brand new family that I never thought that I'd have. I never looked for, but yet here they are. Here she is. Here's Angie, and all these amazing people. And in addition to that, my life's purpose. I was a chemical engineer. I was going to get a nice, cushy job. I planned to run my own engineering firm at some point and be very corporate and live in my own little world and do my own little thing. But then nothing went like I planned, which is the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Thank you.
Let's applaud. Let's applaud for all of them. All right, last but not least, Andrea.
Thanks. So I started organizing domestic workers around 9 years ago because I really wanted to work in my community and honor the women in my family and other women that I knew that were doing this really important work that was being undervalued and disrespected. I want to start by telling a story of a particular woman that I know. Her name's Zoraida, and she was recruited to come to this country as a domestic worker. She was told, you'll get a chance to learn English, and you'll be a nanny, you'll be able to make money. And so she came and she was working for a family in an upper income San Francisco Bay Area neighborhood. And she was taking care of the young children and doing all of the house cleaning. And she never got paid. And she was often verbally abused and denied food. And was told that if she spoke to anyone outside the household, she would be arrested and turned over to immigration. And one day she was listening to Spanish language radio for a little while and heard a story about domestic workers. And it gave her the courage to speak to someone at the school when she dropped off the children in the morning and tell them a little bit about her situation. And that person helped her stage an escape. And they got in touch with us, and we connected her to local resources. And not every domestic worker story is Soraida's story, but every domestic worker is just as vulnerable. These are primarily women of color, immigrant women who are working behind closed doors. And we oftentimes compare it to the Wild West, where there's like this wide range, really wide spectrum of employers. You have like wonderful, loving, caring employers that provide like vacation days and sick pay and Christmas bonuses and benefits, but then we have these other situations that are like modern day slavery. And there's discrimination in our labor laws as well. So in the 1930s, at the height of the U.S. labor movement, domestic workers were excluded from labor protections as a concession to Southern segregationists who were afraid of African American organizing. And a lot of those exemptions and exclusions from labor laws still exist to this day. So we've been fighting to change that. And at the same time, immigrant women and undocumented immigrant women are particularly vulnerable to wage theft and exploitation and harassment and abuse. When we look at immigration, 3/4 of all immigrants are women and children. Only 1/4 of work visas actually go to women, which means that women really have to rely on the family visa, system, and that system has like huge backlogs, which means that people can be separated from their families for decades. There aren't adequate protections for survivors of violence and abuse, whether it's taking place in the workplace or in the home. And then we have a situation where we're seeing like over 1,000 deportations every day. And 1 in 4 of the people being deported are parents and are being separated from their families and being denied, the right to raise their children. So the National Domestic Workers Alliance decided to form this campaign called We Belong Together to really highlight the impact of immigration policies, enforcement, and deportation on women and children in particular. And we started off by taking delegations of women to the states that were passing the most harshest anti-immigrant laws. So we took delegations to Arizona, and we took delegations to Georgia and to Alabama. And then we also started taking delegations of these women to visit deported mothers. We went to a mother's shelter in Tijuana for deported mothers who have been separated from their children, and heard stories like this one woman, Alejandra, who was immigration came into her home when she was dressing her toddler, and she was dragged away, like still clutching her son's shirt. And this year, we've been really focused on passing immigration reform, to respond to what we're seeing on the ground. And it's we've formed a kind of, and through We Belong Together, which is Women for Common Sense Immigration Reform, created a space where immigrant women, domestic workers, and others can really speak up and be protagonists of this fight, and at the same time create a vehicle for mainstream women's organizations to see immigration as their issue, as an issue that affects and impacts women, and really highlight the fact that if you're not supporting immigration reform, that affects the well-being of women, their health, their safety. So together this year, we've done, meetings with legislators between immigrant women and non-immigrant women. Together, we've done rallies, engaged in bold acts of civil disobedience together, and really getting out this message that immigration is a women's issue, and we need immigration reform that responds to the needs of low-income women and their families. And lastly, right now we're also doing a campaign, Wish for the Holidays, to really lift up the voices of children and youth who are writing heartfelt letters and drawing these pictures to talk about the impacts of immigration reform on their families, on their friends, on their neighbors, and their broader community. And then a delegation of these youngsters goes and delivers all of these letters to Congress in December. So, I think we really talk about domestic work as work that touches everyone, whether it's paid or unpaid domestic work. It's something that almost all of us have a connection to in some way or another, and we often call it the work that makes all other work possible. And now we see domestic workers really playing a leadership role in saying, immigration reform is also an issue that touches all of us, that we should all be engaged in. And I'm just really honored to be having this conversation with all of you tonight.
It's great to have you. Let's do a round of applause for all of them. That was spectacular. I could just listen to you all night. All right, but I am mindful of the time, so I'm going to just toss out some questions to each of you, and we'll just have a casual conversation, but I'll save time for the audience because I know they're going to want to jump in as well. So Erica, let me go to you for a minute. You are now a veteran at your very young age of the DREAM movement. You, my dear, are also a veteran, super veteran. But look, this movement that has a youthful element to it is just growing by leaps and bounds, right? And so when you see dreamers today, or maybe non-dreamers, but young people who want to engage, are they in that I'm going to change my name space like you were, or are they further along because you've carved that out for them? Not just you, but all of you. And what kind of advice do you give them? How do you see them engaging in the debate now, and what's different than when you started it?
Yeah, of course. It's definitely different. I would say that, of course, there's still communities, right? There's different communities that are not as close to organizations as some of us are, that are still under fear. There's tons of states that are still not, they don't have as big of a Latino community, so they're still in fear. But what I would say, though, is that we have been able to, through the media, through maybe Univision and Telemundo, and other, and other media, we've been able to actually speak to them in a way that nobody has in the past. And so whenever we actually go into communities, whenever we, organize with different states, we realize that it's a lot easier for dreamers to now say, we're undocumented and unafraid. Before, we would literally come to, for example, I remember I was working for United We Dream, a national organization of dreamers, back in the day, 2 years ago. And I was organizing with some of the dreamers in New Mexico, and it was 3 years ago, and I remember going to them and saying, hey, you guys want to organize a rally, right? Let's do a rally at your at a park anywhere in New Mexico, and you can come out of the shadows, right? And the way that we do rallies like that, we just go, and we call the media, and we go and we say, my name is Eric, I'm undocumented and unafraid, and this is my story. That's kind of like a come out of the shadows rally. And they were still giving us a lot of pushback. They were like, whoa,
You want me
are
to
you
do what?
serious? Like, you want me to do what? And so, and this is not that long ago. And I feel like we have gotten to a place that, of course, DACA also helped, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which gives us a way to, not be in the same situation as some of our parents are of getting vulnerable to deportation, right? We're not as vulnerable to deportation, so it's easier for dreamers to come out of the shadows. But I would say that it's so much better to actually see someone on TV or see someone on the newspapers with their own name and with their own face, with a cap and gown saying, here I am, I'm undocumented and unafraid, it's so much easier for you to say, wow, I can do that too, right? I can do that too, and maybe nothing's going to happen to me. And so, yeah, it definitely has changed, and I'm glad that it hasn't just changed for people who don't understand immigration, but also for our own communities who they need that. And now we're working on our parents to do the same thing. My mom is totally undocumented and free now, too. She's coming out of shadows, and we're doing the same thing with mothers that are usually domestic workers and fathers who are usually in construction or in very tough jobs, that we are asking them to come out and say that they're undocumented, but also that they're very proud of what they do. And they're very proud of being immigrants because they do provide a lot to this country. Without their hands and their work, I don't think we would be in this place right now.
That's a great answer. So let's pick up on the fear theme, right? Because you describe being unafraid, and it's probably as much a function of age and independence. Because Joanna, you talked about, I mean, it was striking to me, I was like, a consequence of fear, of anxiety, of stigma, of almost self-loathing that children have at that age where they're developing. But is there a bridge they're going to cross to as they get older? And what's the effect of having that in these years where so much of your level of confidence in who you are as a person is being formed? So how do you sleep at night as a mother? Because I'm not going to sleep tonight. I'm thinking about this. It's scary.
I have to tell you that I was extremely shocked to hear these stories because I had been working in the community in New Jersey where I did interviews on another project previously starting in 2003. So I had worked in this community. I was doing work on transnational families, different topic, but I knew a lot of the kids. And I wasn't actually in this place in New Jersey hearing those kind of fears at that point. And remember, in 2001, the number of people deported was half per year than what it is today. Right. So I actually went back to New Jersey in 2010, and I mean, this is back in the day. So back in the day, us academics, we take a while to get our research out. So back in the day when I was doing my research, I was completely floored that kids were telling me that they were afraid like that. I had not heard this kind of story before. And in fact, it felt like the study is a little bit longitudinal. I started in 2009, and so I was interviewing people, children in 2009, and then I was in New Jersey in 2011, so sort of over time. I felt like the stories kept getting more intense and more intense, and
correlating with the number of people being deported each year.
I think so, and the stories, and how do I sleep at night? Actually, it's the stories of the younger, the dreamers that have made me felt like there's hope. Because I hear the stories of the young children, and I think they really are afraid, and I think it's very scary. But I think as they grow up and they get a little older, and they see models of people who aren't afraid, that has been the only way I sleep when I hear the stories. When I've been reading and writing about what I've heard.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's more responsibility on these young people. Not only your parents, but all your younger brothers and sisters, but I think you already know that. So, Tolu, I feel like you and I have spent many times together crying, because I was with you in the Senate when that vote happened. And I was also with you, though, when Deferred Action was announced, which is a program the President announced in June of 2012 that said if you qualify for the DREAM Act, you could come forward and get protection against being deported, and Erica's referred to it. And you missed that cutoff day by just a year, by 6 months, because you were the ripe old age of 31, and you needed to be 30 or younger in order to qualify. So a lot of people would have said, I'm giving up, but you didn't. And you've been introduced by members of Congress. You have introduced the President of the United States. So what kept you in the fight? And what's it like to be around these leaders? And do you think they get it?
Oh, yeah. Thinking back to the DACA announcement, I found my way to Tennessee. I was volunteering at the AILA conference, the American Immigration Lawyers Association National Conference. I was in the middle of trying to figure out law school, and I had many conversations with you. And should I go to law school? Should I go now? How do I pay for it? What's happening? And so I'd gone to the AILA conference. I was there with my sister, who's an immigration attorney, and that morning I was, doing my duty and at the stand, and people were buying lawyery books, and and then I checked my phone, and there was just a bunch of emails about an announcement coming, and the president is going to speak, and we got it, and I was like, wait, what? Because we've been working so hard for DACA and been mobilizing and pushing for so long. But it still came as a surprise, because we were always told, no, he can't do that. Absolutely not going to happen. He can't do that. So when it happened, I was beyond the moon. I was so happy. And even though I knew I didn't qualify, because it would and has helped so many people that I care deeply, deeply for. And I didn't feel like I was being left behind. DACA is an amazing, necessary, but still just a small first step. And so I knew that there was still so much more to do, and so many more people that still needed to be helped. But if you can save anybody, it's like, the Titanic and the lifeboats. Get some people in, as many people as you can, get them in, and then we'll keep pushing. Probably not the right example.
So you're Leonardo DiCaprio.
No, not quite. But I just knew that we couldn't. This wasn't the end of the story. Now, if we passed the comprehensive immigration reform bill that I didn't qualify for, then we may have had some trouble keeping me in the movement. That we might have had some problems with. So, with regards to your question about the president,
And senators and members.
And senators and members, thank you, Angie. It's surreal, unnerving.
Do they get it, though? Do they get the issue? Do they get you?
I think they do. One thing that really amazed me with the president, I didn't, so the day of the event, like, everything happened super fast. I didn't know it was happening till the couple nights before. I didn't know it was confirmed till the day before. And I focused narrowly on you're giving a speech, you're speaking in front of a room full of cameras that have some permanence to them. Do not embarrass your mother. And so that was it. Don't trip, focus. I paid a little attention to my hair too, which the humidity was wreaking havoc on. But I tried not to be overwhelmed by the fact that I was meeting the leader of the free world. So it wasn't until after the event and I watched the videos that I noticed something amazing. I saw the president listening. He was listening, and they listen. I think that's the most surprising thing, is that they listen, and for a vast majority of them, they get it. I've been doing this for a while, and for when I first started, this, I wouldn't come out as undocumented. I was just very nervous about it. I was the first dreamer to be in DC full-time, working on immigration reform, working on the DREAM Act, like no one else had done it before. So I was going to the Hill all the time, but I was going as an advocate. And as we got closer to, as things progressed, it didn't take that long, but in meetings, I'd start sharing my story, and I would see the switch, and I would just see there was this new sort of understanding of, wait, really? Are you sure? And you blew their mind, because it's like, you're not who I'm expecting. You're not the undocumented immigrant that I am sending ICE after. This doesn't make sense. You're intelligent. Yes, we are. You're an engineer. Yes, a lot of us are. So it's just, you see the switch.
Right.
Now, whether that translates for some of them into action, into vote, that's a whole nother story.
Right.
But I think they do.
Right.
I think they do.
All right, so Andrea, you know a lot about organizing women to flip the switch with lawmakers. And you've been at this for 10 years at a time that we have growing influence of Latino voters, Asian voters, immigrant voters. I mean, people kind of get this issue and the connection to emerging political power and a broken immigration system. How do you convince women, though, to be a part of that, to help flip the switch in members' minds? And have you seen, is it gotten easier or has it gotten harder? So in other words, is it commensurate with how the issues emerging and with political power that we see with voters of color, or not? Is it every bit as hard today in New York as it was when you started in California 10 years ago?
Well, I mean, I think like Erica and Tolu said, it's like organizing is about relationships. And so I think whether it's today or whether 10 years ago, you still have to build with like each individual person that like comes in the door. And I think, you learn techniques and you learn skills and we build, that network grows and grows. And this isn't, I mean, the United States has a rich history of organizing that, oftentimes we don't pay enough attention to or learn from. But, I think it's, I think what's most interesting to me and what I would love to see all the time when I was working at a grassroots organization in the Bay Area was the women who come in the door looking for help and them getting support and then them wanting to like give back and becoming these like incredibly like bold, courageous leaders. And, just like little by little, like their first trip doing outreach and their first time at a mic and their first time, speaking at a rally or speaking with a legislator and telling their story. It's very much like an incremental process. And I do think though that people, in terms of like the changing demographics and all, I do think that as we grow and as our movement has victories, like people, it sustains us, So I think it's important, as much as we're like fighting back against dehumanization and the kinds of issues that our communities are facing, how do we balance out some of those longer term campaigns with like the shorter things that are like winnable and aspirational and keep us going?
Well, I'm going to wrap up in just a second. I'm going to ask you each a final question, and we'll open it up to the audience. But it is about that, about what sustains us and what keeps us going. So I'll give you all different questions. So, Erica, what does victory look like to you?
A while ago, I would have said some sort of legislation. I would have said either the DREAM Act or immigration reform or, I don't know, any legislation. But for me, along the time that we've been around so much people with so much pain in their hearts and so much fear, and I would say that victory for me would be seeing my community being able to fight for themselves, learning how to even stop their own deportation if they have to, because I feel like at some point we're going to have to stop depending on what the government wants to give us, because I see, like, for example, the civil rights movement, that's what they did. They took on their own, that they empowered themselves, and I want to see every single one of my immigrant community empower themselves, and I think once that happens, we're going to see a whole new change in this country, and then we're going to see tons of legislation being changed.
Joanna, if you could tell a lawmaker one thing based on the research that you've done, what would it be?
One thing.
Well, or several things. Well, what should they do?
There needs to be a legalization procedure, and I think the way immigration policy now is set up, immigration policy is influencing decisions that really are in the family sphere. I should be able to live with who I want to live with. I should be able to marry who I want to marry, and I should be able to live with my kids if I want to live with them. Right now, immigration policy is preventing all of those things, and I don't think that's the business of government.
Well said. I want you to talk to lawmakers.
Yeah.
So, Tolu, what do you want to be doing in 10 years? Describe your life and how you see it.
It's a difficult one, but okay.
Sorry.
In 10 years, I hope I'm several years out of law school and living every day, still being amazed by the doors that can be open to you when you live by faith. I think I can't, the life I'm living now is not the one I planned for myself, but wow, I wouldn't change it.
Andrea, when you're talking to the public or policymakers, what's worked in getting them to zero in and connect on your issue and the people that you organize, and to them not see them as the other? Like what works?
It's the stories, and I think, and I mean, we all know it's the stories, but I think a diversity of stories, and so for some legislators, it's like the dreamer. For others, it's like a younger kid or a grandmother, or someone who's not an immigrant, that employer, coming out and standing in solidarity with the woman who takes care of her mother, and, but definitely I think the personal connection.
Right. Grounding it in the morality of the issue. It's been an honor to be with you guys, but we're going to now open it up, and I'm going to stop dominating and let you all ask questions.
Yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, Hi, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that in the next 3 years there will be an immigration reform coming out of this Obama administration?
In the next 3 years?
Yeah.
All right. Erica, what do you think?
I was hoping I didn't have to answer that one. I'm confident. I think that we can get something done. I feel like right now the politics are changing. Folks are starting to realize that it's funny, some people think that like Latinos are kind of just popping out everywhere, right? Like, because you see it in the news, like the Latino community is growing, so politicians are starting to pay attention to that. That's not the case, but the reality is that, there's a really big shift on the politics in this country. That's probably going to happen because there is a big, the Latino population is taking the polls. A lot of 18-year-olds, a lot of Latino 18-year-olds are going to vote. A lot of Asian 18-year-olds are going to vote. And so I feel like one time or another, there's going to have to be a change in mind of some of those folks who oppose immigration reform to think about how they're going to be able to represent communities that are growing, that are mainly either Latino or Asian, or that have family members that are undocumented or that came from immigrants. And so I'm hoping that we can get something done still before the end of this year, or perhaps next year. And I know it's difficult to pass things in when it's election year, but you know what? Deferred action happened in an election year. And so you just have to have the faith, and like Tolu said, and keep pushing, and that's exactly what we're doing every single day.
Great. You want to answer, or we go on to the next question?
We can go to the next question.
Okay. It's a good answer. It's the same one I would have given. Excellent. Another question.
Hi.
And you have the mic.
Yeah, lucky me. So first of all, I hope some of you run for office one day. That would be great. And second, how, I guess, have you been working to make this a larger issue on the part of young people, that, building consensus among not only immigrants or dreamers from Latin America, but also from, Southeast Asia? And is there work being done? And I guess, how are you building that consensus, and is it translating into actionable items?
Sure. If you watch the news, they will assure you that immigration is a Latino issue, but we know it's not. And through our advocacy and through just living every day in our communities, we are touched by and are able to touch people that are immigrants, that are from Asia, that are from, yes, Latin America, that are from Africa, that are from all parts of the world, Europe, name it. So there is definitely a larger conversation that is being had. It's not necessarily translating into the mainstream media yet, but we are seeing more stories of non-Latino dreamers. We are seeing more profiles of Latino dreamers. In terms of the youth issue, that I think is already covered because we're so interconnected. And so these young people, or we young people, Please, I'm not old yet,
No.
right? Okay,
I'm the old one here.
good. No, not good. So you're in classes with your friends that some are American, some are not, and even if they're American, some are Italian, some are from Asia, some are from other areas of Europe, and so you're talking to people, and with Facebook and Twitter and all of that. So I think the younger generation already has this beat, and we don't need to train them on connecting and realizing the truth, even if some in the media are unwilling as of yet to admit to it, because maybe it's not as sensational to talk about an undocumented immigrant from Germany. It's more interesting to talk about the Mexican that walked across the border as opposed to the German. So, but I think that there is a general realization that this issue goes far beyond the Latino community, and beyond that, it goes beyond immigrants. It affects Americans. It affects our economy at large. And so, yeah, I think that we're good. There's still work to be done, but we're good.
Andrea, do you see that? Do you see a diversity in the gals that you're organizing in age, perhaps? Are they younger, are they older, or not so much?
I mean, in both. I mean, I didn't mention this earlier, but when we get together for our annual congresses, we're usually doing simultaneous interpretation into 4 or 5 languages. So it's not just Spanish speaking. It's Portuguese, it's Filipina, Haitian, and other African diaspora. Yeah. So. And then also a diversity in age, because even within each organization, so I know some organizations that they have members who are, 16, 17, and then they have, women coming to the organization who are, there's one woman who I worked with on the California Domestic Worker Bill of Rights campaign. She was 82, still working as a domestic worker, and was there when Governor Brown signed the bill and, in tears. So yeah, I think there's a wide range of participation, people who are really active on the issue.
Great. Any more questions? All right, we'll get you 2 for sure.
Thank you. With the Affordable Care Act in the forefront of the attention of the nation's attention, not only in the media, but also in living in DC and reading so much about healthcare, what would you say for the 30 million uninsured Americans, which also includes 11.2 undocumented immigrants that are uninsured? What would you say are the long-term effects, not only economically, but personally as well, for these undocumented immigrants?
Joanna, you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I guess what I would say is that this issue of illegality is really a public health issue, and that's sort of why I wanted to introduce this idea and that vision of this injury pyramid. I think that we are going to see injuries at the emotional level over time, and who knows, maybe this will change. And as I said not too long ago, back in the day for me, which is 15 years ago, I didn't see the same impact among younger children that I was working with. I think this is something that can change, and it's up in the air. I don't know what will happen, but I do think it's a public health issue, very significant public health issue.
That sounds right. Anyone else want to add to that? All right, the gentleman in the red tie.
Let me preface this by asking that consider what I'm about to say in the spirit it's offered, which is please consider reaching out to veterans organizations. You have so many from the immigrant community who are in uniform, and as was mentioned, everyone knows a family member who's affected by this. And I think you'll find a lot of support in that, and that might go a long way in encouraging some of those more reluctant politicians to consider their position.
That is great advice, and actually in honor of Veterans Day, my organization is releasing a paper tomorrow. My colleague Phil Walgan has been helping to spearhead it, and it's about immigrants in the military. And we have had in the past a lot of support, particularly around the DREAM Act, because one of the ways that you could qualify would be if you had served in the military for 2 years. And also just in terms of being prepared, as the Armed Forces wants diversity and needs folks willing to serve. So that has been an arena of stakeholders that have been helpful to us. But you're right to remind us to keep tapping that. So thank you. It's great advice.
And just to add just one more
Sure.
thing, not too long ago, it was a couple of weeks ago, we were able to have a briefing in Congress, a bipartisan briefing. We had 2 members of Congress who were Democrats and 2 Republicans. We haven't had one in a while, and it was exactly about that. We had a couple of dreamers that came from throughout the country who wanted to serve the military that couldn't. And we also had one veteran who, his story is really amazing, but he was actually deployed overseas. And when he was overseas, he received a call from his mom that his sister was picked up by ICE. And so because of that, his decision was to return home. He was honorably discharged, but he still says, I feel really bad at the fact that I was serving my country, yet my sister was being kicked out of it. Mm-hmm. And so it was a great story for the members to hear, those members who, two of the Republican members that were at the briefing a couple of days later came out in support of immigration reform. And so it's definitely something that, some of the Republican members really want to hear about. And it's definitely something that we have to bring up more often in the media and also to our legislators.
I think that's a great note to end on. Yeah. So, round of applause for our terrific panelists. Thank you all so much.